now we are going to have our first panel, and we will hear from survivors from orphanages who were not orphans and who found themselves in orphanages. You know that the opening panel at Trust Conference is always with survivors, because when we hear their voice, we understand why we are there and why we need to act. So we will hearing of them very soon after. But just a few numbers. 8 million children and young people live in institutions worldwide. But 80% of children in orphanages have a living parent. This is really shocking. What's more, the situation is fueled by the rapidly growing industry that Kate mentioned of voluntarism. And it gives traffickers a financial incentive to place children in institutional care. Before we turn to the panel, I want to give the floor to Zafina Yonyan. She's a wonderful, remarkable young girl, young woman, she's 18 now, in Nepal. She's a survivor of orphanages. And she explains very well the situation. She was due to speak here. She could not get a visa. Visas are more and more difficult to get to get into the UK. This is a big issue for our conference because we have voices from all over the world. And we beg Theresa May to give more visas, at least for conferences. Anyway, listen to Zafina.
Namaste, I'm Zafina. I'm 18 years old and I study in grade 12. It's a great honor for me to share my story with you all. I was 7 years old when I first came to Kathmandu and I was sent to an orphanage there. I came to Kathmandu thinking that my future would be bright after staying there, but I had no idea what the future had to offer me in the days and years in Kathmandu. In that orphanage, the children were neglected. We were not given proper food and clothes. I, along with my friends, tried many times to escape that orphanage, but we were caught every time. The foreign volunteers used to come and visit us. They used to give us toys and candies. They used to take our photographs. We were forced to sing and dance to make them happy. In short, I was living in hell. After almost living in that orphanage for a year, I was moved to the next one. The next orphanage was better than the previous one. Finally, when I tried to adjust in the second orphanage, the owner of the previous orphanage came to visit me. I was so terrified of her. I was so afraid that I hid under the bed. I thought that she was going to take me back to the previous orphanage. I thought that she was going to steal my happiness once again. Everything was good in the second orphanage because we used to live in a big house and I went to a really good boarding school. Everything was good, but something was lacking, and that was family. As far as I can remember, I had no idea what actually family meant. As I grew older and came to my senses, family actually meant mother, father, brother and sister, which I was told I hadn't any. Every night I used to cry with my mouth shut with my hands so that the others could not hear that I was crying. I prayed to God every day to help me meet my family, but my prayers were unanswered. But the year 2012 proved to be in my favor. I was reunited with my family after a long time. At the beginning, I wasn't able to recognize my own father. I work as a change agent to stop orphanage trafficking. I go to schools and communities to make people aware about the orphanage trafficking. Thank you for listening to my story.
Dafina, we will miss you today on the panel. To moderate the panel, we have Andrea Powell. Many of you know her. She's the founding president of Karana Rising, social enterprise in Washington, D.C. But it is 15 years that in Washington, she has been receiving in her little NGO so many girls who escape their traffickers. And she gets them just when they escape. And so she helped them, well, wash, sleep, and have a life. So she's really remarkable. I have seen her on the turf many times. She's fantastic. She will be joined on the panel by Joseph Mvuara, sorry if I pronounce it poorly, and he has survived orphanage trafficking and has become an advocate committed to mentoring young in Kenya. Snezana Vukovic. Snezana is a real character, and she's a survivor of orphanage trafficking in Serbia. And she went through many other horrific crimes. I mean, her story is terrible to listen. She is now a leader in human rights, and she's an advocate in her native Serbia. Sophie Otiende is a survivor of trafficking who is a program consultant at heart. The only organization in Kenya which focuses exclusively on counter-trafficking work. She was not in an orphanage, but her story is worth listening to, and her impact in Kenya is growing. And of course, we will have also Kate Vander on the panel. So please move him on the stage while we listen to the video that my team, the editorial team of the Thomson Reuters Foundation has prepared.
Millions of children around the world live in orphanages, but 80% are not orphans, according to Lumos, the charity set up by J.K. Rowling. Many have been taken from their parents. Traffickers have worked out that orphanages are good business, attracting large donations from well-meaning individuals and organizations. From Nepal to Haiti and India to Uganda, the number of orphanages across the developing world has mushroomed. Experts say many orphanages are a hidden form of modern-day slavery. Traffickers often dupe parents with promises their children will be educated and return home to lift them out of poverty. Some even target poor pregnant women, offering to pay their medical costs in return for their babies when they give birth. Disasters like the massive earthquakes in Nepal and Haiti only make the situation worse. Orphanages, even well-run ones, are bad for children. They're cut off from their families, friends and communities. Abuses are common. Children may be beaten, sexually abused, starved or re-trafficked. Parents of children with disabilities may be promised they will receive medical care, but horrific abuses have recently been uncovered in orphanages in Guatemala. Some children were tied to wheelchairs, metal railings and even held in cages. The UN Children's Agency UNICEF says placing a child in an orphanage quadruples the risk of sexual violence. Some organisations, like Forget Me Not, are helping to rescue children from these institutions, but they also have a broader aim: to end the orphanage business for good. They want to develop community-based services to enable all children to live with their families. There are calls for there to be no more children living in orphanages anywhere in the world by 2050. But with 8 million youngsters currently living in these institutions, how feasible is this?
Hello, I'm Andrea Powell and I am the founder of Corona Rising. Good morning. I'm very happy to see all of you here. Before we begin, I wanted to set the stage for this conversation. As you've been told, we do have incredible survivor leaders and youth advocates here on the stage today. You might be questioning how I, an American, got up on this stage, and that's a long story, since it probably seems to many so far away from the United States, so far away from the UK, to have a conversation about youth living in orphanages, or as they say in the States, state institutional care. But I wanted to bring this conversation closely in. In 2007, my first trip to Serbia, I was on a mission with colleagues to understand how so many youth ended up on the streets, how so many youth ended up in trafficking situations. Where were their families? Where were they coming from? How are they all just walking around? And it seemed from our outside eyes, and I think it's important to note that we were outsiders, how is this taking place? And again, I was hearing stories of young people, like some of my colleagues today, saying, I was in an orphanage, I was placed there, my family couldn't support me, then I ran away because it was so awful in there. So we did a study in 2007 to 2009, interviewing about 165 youth from Bosnia and Serbia who were either about to leave state institutional care and orphanages versus those youth who were already out. And what we found is that over 90% had experienced domestic violence and sexual assault prior to going into the orphanage, that about 70% had never received any counseling for those situations, and about 85% had experienced homelessness with their families prior to being put into institutions. So all of that is one side of this story as we think about the three elements that we're having in this conversation today. The first being, where are young people before they're put into institutions? Were they with family? Were they on the streets? Were there things that could have been done by the government, by local authorities, by NGOs to help support youth staying in families? I think we've already established that that's our big option here. We want youth to be able to stay with their families. What about youth whose families are simply unable or unwilling to support them? As I'm based in the States, the vast majority of the over 1,000 young people I've served over the years, about 70% were in foster care or state care prior to being trafficked or during their trafficking situation. In fact, we would see young people who were being trafficked and then going back to the institution every night with nobody aware of what was happening to them during the day instead of being in school. So this issue happens worldwide, broad and south. And so then we're looking at also the next stage, which is what's happening to youth in state care. And we're going to hear a little bit about what happens in some of these orphanages that we're looking at either as volunteers or as donors or people passing by. What are we as bystanders missing that allow for youth to be exploited and trafficked while in state care or directly in orphanages? And then finally, and this is a personal passion of mine, how are youth who are in state care and orphanages actually being prepared for life outside in the community? Are they given financial support? What is life? Who are they being connected to? How are they being prepared to make sure that they can truly thrive and take care of themselves? We are going to hear from three amazing leaders who can share some of their experiences, but I'm here to say that there are many others whose voices probably will never be heard because they were not given that opportunity, so we're representing them as well today. So that's just a few remarks as we get started. I do have one more comment, and then we'll move on to Sophia. So many of you here have been to the conference before, so we're all aware that sometimes people ask really long questions. We are very happy to entertain your questions. We're delighted to hear what you have to ask. We will not be accepting monologues, and we have very short attention spans. So please keep your questions short and question responsibly. Thank you. Sophia.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Sophia Tiende, and as I've been introduced by Monique, I'm a survivor of child trafficking, and I'm really excited to be here. It's my first time here, but I've heard so much about this place. Previous survivors like Evelyn, who've spoken here, are friends of mine, and have nothing but beautiful things to say about the conference. So when it comes to child trafficking and when it comes to my personal experience and how I connect to this subject, is I never got to go to an orphanage, or I never got to get into an institution. And sometimes I say that for me that's a blessing, because I had parents that actually, after my experience happened, they really took responsibility and took care of me, and really put in the work in ensuring that I got the healing that I have. And I think one of the things that is really sad when it comes to orphanages as hubs of human trafficking is the fact that there is so much good intention. It's an abuse of people's good intention. It's an abuse of people's pity, because we've gotten to a place where we actually think that just feeling pity on someone and throwing money for 1 minute will actually solve a whole problem, when there are systematic issues that we actually need to solve before we actually get rid of trafficking. So my contribution and my hope is that my personal story and the work that I'm doing in Kenya is that we don't harm the people that have already been harmed by actually setting up a system that actually disempowers them again. So how can we imagine freedom in such a way that we are not harming people? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we're now going to hear from Snežana Vukovic.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you know, my name is Snežana. I'm coming from Belgrade, Serbia. I have 24 years. My life story, orphanage story, starts in 2005. I was living with my father because I lost my mother. Actually, she left me, but I prefer to think that I lost her. And I was living with my father, who was an abuser. That finished that he raped me 2 times when I was 10 years old. So as a child, my grandfather and my grandmother didn't actually want to do anything with me because I put my father into the jail. So they left me into the orphanage. But the biggest mistake of my social worker, she put me in the orphanage in Belgrade. That was the first one. That orphanage is for the youth who are using drugs, who are escaping homes, who are really in a bad life position, who are doing very bad stuff like stealing and stuff like that. And since I was just abused, I was forced to do a lot of things at my home. My father was suffocating me and similar. I shouldn't been there, but they put me in that orphanage, saying that, actually promising me that I will have a new foster family very soon, and that this is just like a short time. But it took like 4 years. I was 4 years in that orphanage. My first connection with the staff and with the girls inside, that was my first night, my birthday actually. I remember that date very well. They were so drugged on heroin, they forced me to kill a little cat because she had something, I don't know what. And they put her on my bed and forced me to sleep with it. When I told the staff what happened, they told me, I don't care. Why are you saying that they done that? You don't have any proof. Even though that cat was lying just next to me and I was shaking and crying, but nobody actually cared. That was the first time I realized that I'm all by myself. I have to like do things for myself because no one will care. The bad situation I was moved a lot because I didn't agree with so-called rules of the orphanages. So-called, they called us misbehavior ones, but they just don't care about us. There is no one to listen to you. There is no one to ask you, did you eat? And the food is horrible. They left me to go from the orphanage when I was 16 years old, but they didn't give me food, they didn't give me clothes, they didn't give me anything. They just told me, all right, you're free, go out. So I ended up living on a train station for 2 years. And I met a girl who, well, we can say that she like helped me to get on my feet. She's Armenian. I finished up in the hospital because I fell down from the pain. I had some fluid, I didn't feel good. And she helped me. She got me to the hospital, take care of me, and I was living at her place for 2 years until I didn't get back on my feet. Now I'm living with my boyfriend. I have my own apartment, and I just want to raise awareness of how many children are put in the wrong hands, in the bad hands. In Serbia, there is no like donors. I mean, you have, but there is very little number. Unfortunately, children are just taking care of themselves the best way they can. They don't have their childhood, and that's something I think that we need to change. Thank you.
Hi, Joseph.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joseph Moura. I'm a 20 years old student from Kenya, and I'm ready to share my story with you. Okay. Having born by a single mother and later losing her to typhoid, my life and that of my siblings took another turn. I remember very well a stranger came to my grandmother's home who really loves us and still does. And the outcome of this strange man spoke with the grandma, and the outcome of this was that I had to leave home and go to an orphanage. I and my brother went to the orphanage. In that, we were promised good education, we were promised health care, protection, basic needs, but that was not the case. Things changed. You know, first day and second day, you were treated a bit well. Then after that, things start getting worse. I was among the big boys by the time, and I had to wake up at 5 a.m., milk 2 of the 4 cows, attend to them, give them pasture, and later on I would prepare and go for school. The school was about 3 kilometers from the institution. And sometimes I had to miss schools just because we have been told a volunteer is coming. So we had to miss school maybe for 1 or 2 days just to practice some songs and dances to entertain them. And once these volunteers are pleased with what we have done, they would donate to the director, give money, give clothes, food, and they would say, buy something for these kids. But that was never done to us. Like everything that was brought, it was kept in the store and later sold. So we were like, and also the director had employed all the sisters, brothers, and cousins. They learned that home. I remember very well there was a boy who was a bit younger, and his leg was broken by one of the staff just because he has peed on the bed, wetted the bed. And because the director was angry about buying new sheets, buying new mattresses, and when this matter was taken to him, they just covered the story and nothing was done to that. So afterwards, there was this, I can say that after that incident of that boy, there was some intervention, some volunteers, Michelle, Aurora had started bringing some of the kids out. I was not taken back home by Michelle, by the Stahili Foundation. I was taken home by the institution director. And this time, he took me at night. And that thing, it really pained me. I was like, this man got me from my grandmother during the day. How comes he's taking me back at night with nothing? In fact, it was an ambush to my grandma, like, why are you here? I was like, I've been brought here. I'm no longer living in the orphanage. That was like my grandmother really cried, and I was like, what am I going to do? Life changed. But after a while, I had finished my primary school, so I was like, I need fees to start a high school. I need food. I need protection, health. And my grandma was like, oh, what am I going to do? So I stayed with my grandma maybe 1 month, then Stahili Foundation I was connected to Stahili Foundation, and since that time up to today, I am with Stahili. They are protecting me. They are giving me everything I need. Like I'm in school, I'm doing a mechanical course, and everything I'm given by Stahili. And I appreciate because they really changed my life. That's my story.
So we have actually already heard from Kate. So we are going to transition in some questions that we've developed as a team. This has been a very collaborative process and thinking about what we want to share Sophie, I want to start with you. You did not share some of your incredible advocacy work as a youth leader in Kenya, and I really want people to have an opportunity to hear this amazing contribution you're making to an issue that affects you personally.
Okay, so one of the things that for me is very close to my heart is that it took me so much time to heal and recover, just because by the time I went through my experience, I couldn't even name what crime had gone through. And for most victims, most survivors here, one of the things is that people don't even know what they went through. They can't even identify what crime happened to them. That's the nature of trafficking, that you can't name the crime. And for me, one of the most important things is for survivors to be able to name the crime, to be able to identify that this is trafficking. And above that, give holistic care where survivors are in control of their healing and they're not being treated like we are doing favors. Because I feel like that's what happens with orphanages care. It's that we feel that by restoring justice to survivors, we are actually doing them a favor. So for me at heart, that's one of the things, is that we give survivors voices. We look at protection holistically. We work with survivors. We understand that freedom can only be experienced collectively most of the time. And we work with communities, we work with families to empower them and take care of them so that when survivors go back, they basically can be able to go back to a home that is safe, where they're loved and they're taken care of. And something else that I'm quite passionate about, and I know that this is the place to talk about it, is ethical storytelling, because we need to be able to tell stories of survivors in a way that empowers them. We can't be showing pity, because when survivors' trauma is paraded and people actually get a high out of it, and we really don't think about how it affects them and how it affects the whole system, is why we end up with things like orphanage trafficking. Yeah, yeah.
So I think one thing I want to highlight that you said is that people need to understand and be able to name and label their experiences using their own terms, yeah, and understanding what they've been through. Snezhana, I've known you for longer than I care to admit, but we have seen a lot together, and I want to hear from you if you could give a message to other young people who are standing in your shoes, who are in those institutions in Serbia or anywhere today. What would be your message to them?
Oh, where to begin? Well, first of all, love yourself. Have faith in better tomorrow. Fight for your dreams. Don't give up. Don't believe in everything. I mean, how to say that and it doesn't like seem bad. Believe people, but believe more in yourself. Rely more on yourself. And don't let bad people, bad words change you, to change the way you are, to change your kindness or your will for fighting. Just be yourself, be always honest, be the way you are, but never be mean, never be envy. Because if you're envy, you will never gonna succeed in anything. You just have to go to find your own right way and to go like in the right way, through the right way, if that has a meaning. For me it does, because I was sold, and so many times I was kidnapped 3 times. I know what are they feeling, and as Sophie said, the biggest mistake is when you pity the victims, because then in their eyes they feel very low powered. They feel very offended in some point. Not like, oh, you're thinking bad of me, but the truth is, you will never see me as you saw me when you didn't heard my story. You will never now see me the same eyes as you're doing now. Now it's totally different story. That's what Sophie told me last night, and she was right. My only message for them is just be yourself, believe in yourself, and that's it. Honestly, just don't give up. I don't have anything to say about that.
Hi, Joseph. Right. So many people saw your situation when you were living in the orphanages, when you and your family were trying to get by. People were seeing things, and yet nothing was happening to truly support you. What is your message to bystanders, to people who are living in communities where there's currently orphanage trafficking, or the voluntourism is a new term I've learned recently for going into state orphanages? And what is your message to them? What should they be doing? What should they be saying to take action to help youth?
Okay, I would start saying that if you see me being abused, like you are passing by and you find me being beaten by somebody, and then you walk away, in your mind, what do you say? Maybe somebody will come and help. So I would say, don't wait for that somebody to come and help. You have just seen me. Help me. Get me out of this. You know, the problem is that maybe as Africans, we wait for the change. We don't want to be that change. So my advice is, don't see something and wait for somebody to do it. Because that somebody, you are seeing it and waiting for him or her to do it, he or she is also waiting for you to do it. So we are here. Let's not wait for somebody to bring that change. Let us, who have seen these problems, give that change. Be that change. That's my message to them.
So you see me turning this way now. Kate and Sophie, this question is for the both of you. As you know, we have many very influential, inspiring, and thoughtful people here in the audience, but coming to this conference is not their activism. What they do afterwards is. So my question to you is, what can people here today in the audience do to address the issues that matter most in making youth safe from orphanage trafficking or helping youth exit state institutional care safely?
Okay, I feel like I've talked too much. Okay, so one of the things that I'll say is, and I think I was discussing this with Michelle yesterday, because we were talking about funding and how important it is for funding, for institutions to be funded for work. And some of you here basically fund institutions that provide care for victims of trafficking or provide care for vulnerable people. And some of the demands that are actually made by donors actually fuel what is happening, because when you demand to come and open a shelter, HEART has lost donors because I've said no. The children in our shelter will not be paraded before a donor. So we've lost funding because basically I will not parade victims of trafficking in a zoo. And that needs to be addressed. We need to change the way we fund projects. We need to rethink how programs are designed, and we need to think about systematic change. It doesn't take one day, and I'm happy that Monique set up this where we are thinking together and not in silos, because that's what we need. Change is not going to come tomorrow. So when you tell me in 3 years, I need to basically have given you a certain number of things, and you want pictures to show for it, and you really don't want to listen to the details as a donor, you basically set people up to lie. You set people up to abuse the people that they're supposed to be protecting. And for me, that's one of the things, that's one of the messages that it was very important for me. We need to rethink how we are going to think about the future when it comes to programming and how we fund protection for victims of trafficking and vulnerable people in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. The funding situation is really difficult. We had no trouble fundraising for an orphanage, no trouble ever. The money poured in. When we changed and transitioned from an orphanage into reunifying children with their families, and that's what Forget Me Not does now, is we work with governments to close orphanages and reunify the children and then monitor them in a holistic manner. We found it incredibly hard to attract funding, and we still do. And it's so difficult to understand. One of the things that you were just saying, and I think is very true, is from Australia, where I'm coming from, and in many developed, I suppose, nations that are funding programs that are in the global south, we have this expectation that we will have photos and that there will be a right to go and visit the program, and we will have interactions with survivors and things like that. And it does drive the whole process, particularly in orphanages and orphanage trafficking, because everyone wants to see the children and to love the children. And that is one of the critical harms that is caused in orphanage trafficking. And if we could only shift people's mindset from funding orphanages to funding families and keeping families together, which, by the way, costs 1/6 of what it costs to keep a child in an orphanage. So it doesn't make sense economically to have children institutionalised. It doesn't make sense for their long-term well-being, because we know we have 80 years of research that says institutionalisation is bad for children. It doesn't make sense in any way to institutionalise children, yet we perpetuate it because we suspend the knowledge that we have in relation to our own country's situations when we're dealing with other countries. And so if we can change that mindset, I think that would be really critical.
Thank you. So I think those are some key points that we've looked at here in terms of how do we shift the narrative from wanting to think of children in institutional care as pets, in a way to give candy and clothes to, but really think about this as a way to responsibly, as a community, make sure that youth can stay with families, or if they cannot, that they can be cared for in a way that's really going to prepare them for a better future. Abandonment happens to be the #1 issue that my clients who were survivors of trafficking faced in the States, as well as from what I saw in Serbia. And I think we have to think about how we responsibly engage. And running a shelter myself, I can say we had many donors want to come and visit the girls, and we also said no, much to their dismay. Yes. But I think that this is appropriate time to pause and say that I know we're running a bit behind schedule. The red on the numbers there was a little stressful. So I wanted to know if that means that you would like for us to transition to the Q&A, or if you. Yes, Monique said yes. So we are going to question responsibly with short, succinct questions. Thank you. Yes, oh yes, please make movement. I'm nearsighted, otherwise I won't see you. Stand up.
My name is Thomson. I'm from Cambodia. I'm from Phnom Penh Post. I'm a journalist. I want to understand more. You are feeling confident enough on the speech. Sorry. Again, my name is Thomson. I'm from Cambodia, from a journalist, Phnom Penh Post. I feel like your expression here is very strong enough, rehabilitation enough, clearly. So I would like to understand more in depth with the transition after when you come back from the the difficult times in your traffics, and then move to your house, and then your accommodation, and then how, beside of the government, beside of the NGO shelter, and then so how the government can help any transaction from the point you move to at least example like 3 or 4 months recover. Now you are strong enough. So I would like to understand more rehabilitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you want us to speak to rehabilitation or to reintegration into the community?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
Oh, you want to try?
Okay.
In terms of government, not NGOs.
In terms of government. Okay, so I think I have very mixed opinions when it comes to government directly engaging in rehabilitation, because sometimes when a government does rehabilitation, then who becomes accountable? Who do they become accountable to? So for me, the main thing when it comes to rehabilitation is we have to think of, regardless of who's doing it, there has to be accountability in the whole process. The victims have to be able to complain. They have to ask questions. They have to be in charge of their plan. So how do we develop a rehabilitation program where victims basically are in charge, survivors are in charge of their own care plan. They're in charge of saying, this is what I need, and this is where I need to go. And government actually funds it. One of the issues, for example, that we have in my country is the fact that at the moment we don't have any government funding specifically for rehabilitation of victims of trafficking, which means that if NGOs basically do the work, they have to depend on donors. And then we go back to the whole issue of NGOs have to go to the extreme sometimes to attract funding. I think one of the main ways that government could actually do this is basically by putting funding specifically to the people that are doing rehabilitation. Yeah.
Thank you. Question, next question, yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. My name is Juma Amaju, President, Helpline Foundation for the Needy Abuja. I want to thank the organizers of Trust Conference because when I saw this particular sub-team, Orphanages as Trafficking Hubs, my foundation went into a little research and we discovered that a lot of orphanages in Abuja, Abuja is the federal capital of Nigeria, has so many children in the orphanages that are going through a lot of difficulties. The operators of the orphanages use it as a source of business. Their children are schooling abroad, while the children in the orphanages are suffering. So we now reported to the authority in Abuja, and as we speak, they say I should ensure that when I come, I should thank the organizers because this was what led them now to go and close 3 orphanages in Abuja 2 weeks ago. Horrific pictures of these orphanages and the state of the children in the homes that were closed. Then the government of the Federal Capital Territory Administration, because they have their own government sponsors of orphanages.
Ma'am, do you have a question?
Okay, my question is, what can we do? For example, my own foundation, we discovered this problem and reported to the government. Is there any link between the Trust Conference and any other smaller NGOs that can be reported so that the government orphanages can also be supervised in case they're having difficulties as well?
That is such a thoughtful question. I think that yeah, we apologize. We're not quite sure how to respond.
We were having difficulties.
That would be great.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm the Chief Executive of Lumos. We work internationally to end exactly what is happening in Nigeria and many countries. We have training, guidance and advice and research available. We'd be very happy to provide it to you for free. So let's have a conversation in the break.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question.
Atlanti Moquette from Giving Women. I have a more personal question, which I think both Sophia and Venana have mentioned, the issue of being identified by your experience. And how do you get re-embraced? How do you prepare your families, your friends to embrace you without identifying you with the experience you've been through?
Well, actually, at first, I didn't tell anyone what's going on, only because of those labels. It's hard to just get into the society and just try to embrace first yourself, then friends, family, if you have one. I don't have any recipe for it, and everybody does it in its own way. Me personally, I was just lying about myself a lot. I didn't want to tell people, yes, I am a victim, yes, I am from the orphanage, yes, I don't have parents. If somebody asked me, I was lying, I have parents, I live in this house, I live in that house. Until 2 years ago. Then I decided just, all right, I'm that. There is no point of just running away from it. It will never leave my side. And if somebody wants to accept me the way I am, that's beautiful. Thank you for the opportunity you're giving me. But if you don't want to, please just step back and move forward so someone with patience and with love can approach me.
I'm 28 Too Many, an anti-FGM charity. I've worked a lot in Africa in violence against women work, anti-violence against women work, and then anti-FGM work, female genital mutilation and also the complications of that with fistula and incontinence, and whether it's children being left in hospitals because their mothers leave them abandoned, the babies need to be rehoused from the hospital, or girls who have become abandoned by husbands because of FGM and/or the incontinence that comes from child marriage and fistula. I wonder how you can address the short-term need for rehabilitation and ensuring it's well met before they can, so that they are prepared for rehabilitation into their communities, but if it stays too long, they get institutionalized and don't ever want to go back, and what we can do about that dilemma.
Okay. So I think one of the things I've realized is that we like approaching many issues, especially when it comes to dealing with people with, like, we kind of want to have a one solution for everything, and it isn't. I think one of the ways we have to get out of this, we have to realize that each situation is different. And I think the earlier you actually trace somebody's family, the easier it is to actually be able to rehabilitate them. Because for us, I'll give an example of the work that we do. When we actually rescue a child, one of the things that we do very quickly is actually be able to try and make sure that they give us information about where they come from. In Africa in general, we are a collective society, we are a community. Most of the time when I define family, when I talk about my family, I'm just not talking about my immediate family. There are cousins, there are friends, there are people who could possibly take care of those children. So if one of the things, we do a parallel program where we are working with the community and we are working with the individual at the same time. So if we can do rehabilitation and building community resilience at the same time, then reintegration becomes easy. I hope that sort of answers it.
Thank you. Did you want to tell anything? Okay, he's okay. We have another question over here.
Hello, my name is Basma. I come from Lebanon, from an area where foster care or alternative to foster care is not enforced, or we don't have laws. And I'm speaking about an area where we have refugee also situations, children who are refugee or children who are asylum seekers. So you speak about community resilience, and I would be very interested to know how community, especially, I don't know if you have any background to be a refugee, but how the refugee communities or asylum seeker can be helping into prevention of child trafficking, if any way, or sometimes responding to a child trafficking inside orphanage, institutional care, or even with somebody who are out of the systematic or formal situation. And second, for a government who doesn't have a foster care but still have orphanage, still have institutional centers, how we can make ensure that children are transferred safely or have a safe exit from this orphanage. I'm speaking about Lebanon, but also speaking about Iraq.
Thank you.
Speaking about Yemen. Thank you so much.
So what I'm understanding from your question is you're interested in the pathway out of institutions into independent life? Is that okay, and community resilience, okay. Does anyone here feel comfortable responding to that?
Well, I didn't see much of a community resilience. The main problem in Serbia, as I can see, is that we have, you have shelters when you go out from the orphanage. That's where I met her. When you go out from the orphanage, you have a shelter where you can go, but now if you have 15 years, that's the top limit. I think that we need to establish, let's call it a company, a society, a group of people that will take care of those people without age limits. Because there is so much people that are living on the street. I know lots of them. When you get from the orphanage, you don't actually get anything. They just say you get lost. That's all you get, basically. So in Serbia, you don't have any accommodation, nothing, literally. I think that we need to establish something like that to improve youth's future and youth's health. But I don't know in other countries. she told about the babies. So I just want to say something about that. I've done my research because before I come here. We have, in this year, more than 400 babies were stolen from their parents inside of the hospital where they were born. More than 600 children and women only this year are victims of slavery and victims of any kind of violence. And that's just in Belgrade. So that's a big issue. And I think that your idea and that this community, like, if all of us just put together and make something, any kind of institution for them, to give them, I don't know, education, work, to make them have some course. For example, like Corona Rising is doing. You have courses you can go to, and you can make something from your life. So I think that's the good idea for, like, saving youth.
Joseph?
Okay. I also like to add and say that also the community, like where I come from, the community need to be enlightened. It need to be told, like when I was being taken to an orphanage, some of the people that were my neighbors, they were happy. But then when I was brought back and they heard my story, what we were going through, they were like, why, how? So I think the community need to be enlightened, and also the community can also fight those people, those traffickers, because if somebody comes and takes you, I think the community will wonder, where is your child, where did your child went? So the community, I'm trying to say that the community need to be enlightened and also fight those traffickers, because some of the traffickers also come within the community, because maybe somebody came from, like, I say, Nairobi, just started an orphanage in the community. Then they see, oh, they are developed, there are volunteers coming, they are given some money. Another person digs from the same community. I'll just move from my community and go to another community and start another orphanage. So I think the big thing that community also need to be enlightened about, and let them know the challenges. Let them be assisted in fighting these orphanages. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I think that we are close to closing. I wanted to make a couple of closing remarks, and then for those of you who do have questions, of course, you can find us since we're up here after the panel. But I wanted to close and say that I think that we're hearing some themes. How do we look at the individual young people, the individual children who are in these institutions, to empower them with safe passageways out of institutions, or to keep them safe from going into institutions? How do we support government efforts at effective oversight to make sure that orphanages aren't just popping up willy-nilly? And I wanted to make one remark, and then we'll be done. For those of you in the States, you know this, maybe for the global community, not as much so. But in the last years, we've had a big challenge with the conversation around immigration, refugees, and asylum in the United States. And right now, we have an emerging crisis where children are being separated at the borders and putting into basically holding cells, if you will. And these children are now showing horrific results in terms of long-term impact of being separated from their families. And sometimes we're talking about children as young as 2, going to court to have to sign their asylum papers. Obviously, that's not a tenable solution. So we're looking at this issue worldwide, and we have to think local in the solutions, and we have to think global in the responsibility in enforcing them. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to your questions afterwards.